The market was loud and full of voices. Sellers shouting about fruits, meat, and tools, buyers bargaining and laughing, machines humming in the background. But in one corner of the market, 3 alien widows stood close together, their faces covered in shame, their hands holding each other for strength. They were thin, their clothes torn, their eyes tired like they had not slept for many nights. Each one had children waiting at home, hungry and weak, but still they stood in the market, trying to find someone who would give them even a small job. One of them stepped forward and spoke softly, her voice shaking. "Please, we can work. We just need a chance. We can clean, we can carry, we can do anything." But the crowd did not care. People walked past them like they were invisible. Some even laughed, others whispered insults, calling them useless widows, burdens, and beggars. The second widow tried too, her eyes full of tears. "We do not want free food. We just want work. We can earn, we can prove ourselves." But the more they begged, the harsher the crowd became. One merchant waved his hand and shouted, "Get away from my stall. No one wants your cursed hands here." And the people around him laughed. The third widow held her hands together, whispering like a prayer, "Please give us work. Our children have not eaten for 2 days." Her words hung in the air, but no one listened. Some turned their backs, others shook their heads and kept walking. The widows stood there like broken statues, feeling smaller and smaller. The crowd was not only rejecting them, it was crushing their spirit. In their hearts they wondered if they should leave, if they should stop trying, because every door had been closed. Every voice had been cruel. Then something strange happened. The noise of the market faded a little because someone had stopped walking. A human man stood just a few steps away. He had been carrying a bag of tools, his clothes dusty from work, his face quiet but sharp. Unlike the others, he did not laugh. He did not push them aside. He simply looked at them with calm eyes. The widows noticed him and froze. Their hearts beating fast, they were used to rejection. They were used to being ignored. But this man was staring at them like he was thinking deeply. One of them whispered in fear, "He will mock us too," just like the others, but the man did not move. The market crowd began to notice too. Whispers spread, "Look, a human is staring at the widows." Some laughed, some grew curious. Everyone expected him to insult them or tell them to leave. But instead he put his bag down and stepped closer. The widows lowered their heads, too ashamed to meet his eyes. But the man spoke, his voice steady. "Why do you beg like this? Why do you let them laugh at you?" His words were not cruel, but they cut deep. The widows lifted their eyes, confused. They had no answer. No one had ever asked them such a question. One widow tried to explain, her voice weak. "We have no family. No money, no home, only our children. We must beg or they will starve. No one will hire us. We are cursed." In their eyes, tears rolled down her face. The man stood silent for a moment, the crowd waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to agree with the insults, but his eyes softened and he said, "You say you can work, then prove it, not to them." "But to me," the crowd gasped. Some people shouted, "He is mad. He wants to waste his time on widows." Others sneered, "Humans are fools, he will regret this." But the man ignored them all. He kept his eyes only on the 3 widows. The widows were shocked, their hearts trembling. They had begged for work 100 times, but never had anyone said those words to them. Never had anyone offered them a chance. It felt like a dream, a dangerous dream that might vanish in a moment. The man bent down, picked up his bag of tools, and nodded. "Follow me if you truly want work. I will not give you coins for begging, but I will give you a task, and if you succeed, you will never need to beg again." The market fell silent. The people stared, some with anger, some with disbelief, others with curiosity. The 3 widows looked at each other, fear and hope battling inside them, their legs heavy like stone, but their hearts pushing them forward. One of them whispered, "Should we trust him?" Another said, "What if it is a trick?" But the third, with tears in her eyes, said, "We have nothing left. If he lies, we lose nothing, but if he is true, our children may eat again." Slowly, step by step, the 3 widows followed the human, leaving behind the laughter, the insults, and the cruel faces of the market. The crowd watched in silence, none daring to stop them, for in that simple moment, something had changed, and though no one knew it yet, the choice of one human would echo far beyond the dusty market, far beyond the city, and one day across the entire galaxy. The 3 widows followed the human out of the noisy market, their hearts heavy but also trembling with a small spark of hope. They had no idea who this man was, why he had spoken to them, or if he was truly serious. The crowd behind them kept whispering, some mocking, some curious, but none dared to stop them. The human walked with steady steps, his bag of tools swinging at his side. He did not speak at first, only glanced back once to see if they were still behind him. The widows stayed close together, whispering to one another. One asked softly, "What if he tricks us? What if he only wants to laugh at us later?" Another answered, "He looked serious, maybe he is different," and the third whispered, "Even if it is a trick, what do we lose? We have nothing left." They reached the edge of the market where the noise faded and the smell of food was gone. Instead, there was dust, broken roads, and old buildings. The man stopped near a small workshop made of metal sheets and half-rusted beams. Machines were scattered outside, some broken, some covered in cloth. It was clear this place had not seen glory for many years. The widows looked around nervously. They had expected a trick or maybe a cruel test. But instead, the man put his bag down, wiped his hands, and finally spoke. His voice was calm but sharp. "Tell me something. Why do you beg? Why do you let them laugh at you?" The widows froze. His words were not cruel, but they struck like lightning. No one had ever asked them such a question. No one cared enough to ask. One widow looked down and answered in a broken voice, "We do not beg because we want to. We beg because we must. Our children cry from hunger. They cannot wait for hope. We would work if anyone gave us work. But no one does." The man nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "And why do you think no one gives you work?" The second widow spoke, her voice trembling with both pain and anger. "Because they see us as broken, as useless. Because we have no husbands, no family. They believe widows bring bad luck. They call us cursed, but we are only mothers trying to keep our children alive." The third widow clutched her hands tightly. "We would do anything, clean floors, carry stones, mend clothes, anything, but they would rather see us starve." Her tears fell onto the dusty ground. The human listened in silence, his face unreadable. The widows feared maybe he would now turn and walk away. Maybe he had only wanted to test their words. The silence stretched and felt heavy. But then the man's eyes softened. "You begged in front of them," he said, pointing back toward the market. "But not one of them saw you as workers. They only saw you as beggars. I do not see you that way. I will not give you coins for pity. I will give you a task." The widows looked at him in shock. The air seemed to stop moving. They could not believe his words. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. The human continued. "Inside this workshop are machines. Old ones, broken, covered in dust. I need hands to clean them, to sort tools, to move scrap from one place to another. It is hard work, not easy, but it is honest work. If you succeed, then you will never need to beg again. But if you fail, then you walk away. No pity, no coins, nothing." The widows stared at him, the fear inside them fighting with the tiny flame of hope. No one had ever trusted them, even with the smallest job. No one had ever spoken to them as if they were worthy of real work. And yet this man, a stranger, was offering it to them. The first widow whispered, her voice barely a breath, "You would truly let us work?" The man's voice grew firm. "Not let, I will demand it. If you wish to eat, then you will earn it. I do not feed beggars, I train workers. Do you understand?" The widows exchanged glances, their tears turning to a strange feeling they had forgotten long ago. Dignity. Their hands trembled. Their lips shook, but one by one they nodded. "We understand." The human stepped aside, pointing to the workshop door. "Then prove it. Start now." The widows moved slowly at first, their legs still heavy with doubt. But when they entered the workshop, they saw piles of scrap, old gears, dusty tables, and tools scattered everywhere. It was chaos, and yet in that chaos, they saw a chance, their chance. The man leaned on the doorway, arms crossed, watching them. He did not move to help. He only observed the widows began to work, their hands shaking as they lifted heavy pieces, their arms weak from hunger, but they did not stop. They wiped tables, moved broken metal, stacked pieces in neat rows. Dust filled their throats, but they coughed and kept going. Hours passed, the sun lowered in the sky. Sweat rolled down their faces, their legs ached, but still they worked. Because for the first time in so long, someone was watching them not as beggars, but as workers. When the human finally spoke again, his voice was low but carried weight. "You are tired, but you did not. Stop, you proved your words were true. Tomorrow you return and we will continue. But remember this, if you keep working like this, one day the same people who laughed at you in the market will bow their heads in shame." The widow's eyes widened. They could not speak. Their throats tight with tears, they bowed their heads to him, not as beggars, but as workers with respect. And as the night fell over the city, the market did not yet know it. But the choice of this one human had already started to change everything. The morning light spread across the dusty streets when the three widows returned to the workshop. Their steps were weak from hunger, but their hearts carried a new kind of strength. They had promised the human they would come back, and for the first time in years, they felt their words meant something. The human was already there, standing outside with his bag of tools, his clothes the same dusty kind he wore yesterday. His face calm, he looked at them without a smile, but also without mockery. "You came back," he said simply. As if testing their resolve, the widows nodded, standing side by side, their eyes showing quiet determination. He opened the workshop door. The same sight of chaos greeted them. Machines broken and piled in corners, dust thick on every surface, and tools lying scattered like forgotten bones. The widows had spent hours yesterday cleaning, but it looked as if nothing had changed. Their hearts sank a little, but the man spoke firmly. "Work is not won in a single day. Today you will do more." He handed them cloths and small brushes. "These machines are old, but not dead. Wipe the gears, clean the joints, sort the pieces by size, do not rush, work with care." The widows looked at each other nervously. They had never handled machines before. Their lives before had been about cooking, carrying water, raising children. Yet here they were, standing before strange engines that once powered great work. The first widow touched one with gentle fingers. Afraid it might break, dust clung to her hand. She coughed but did not pull back. Instead, she wiped again and again. The second widow bent to sort through the pile of metal parts, her thin arms struggling with the weight. But she gritted her teeth and dragged them into neat rows. The third widow worked quietly, her hands steady as she brushed rust from small gears. The human watched silently, leaning on the doorframe. His eyes sharp, he gave no praise. No instructions beyond the first, he only observed, testing not their strength but their will. Hours passed, sweat ran down their faces. Their clothes clung to their bodies. Their backs ached from bending and lifting. Several times one of them nearly fainted, but the others supported her, whispering, "Do not stop. Remember the children." At one point, the second widow cut her hand on a sharp piece of metal. Blood ran down her palm. She gasped in pain, but before she could even think of stopping, the human walked over, took out a small cloth from his bag, and tied it around her hand. His touch was quick, his voice steady. "Do not let a wound stop you, but do not ignore it either. Protect yourself, then continue." The widow's eyes filled with tears, not from pain but from the strange kindness hidden in his words. She nodded and went back to work, her hand aching but her heart stronger. By midday, the workshop began to look different. The piles of scrap were smaller, the tables cleaner, the machines less hidden by dust. It was not much, but it was proof that their hands had made change. The widows looked at each other, a quiet pride blooming inside them. For years they had been called useless, but here was proof they could still build, still work, still matter. The human finally spoke, his voice carrying a tone they had not heard before, a touch of respect. "You did better than I expected. You worked with care, not laziness. You are not beggars. You are workers." The words struck deep. The widows lowered their heads, not in shame, but in something new, dignity. They whispered softly, "Thank you," their voices trembling. But the man shook his head. "Do not thank me yet. This is only the beginning. Work is not kindness, it is responsibility. If you truly want to change your lives, you will return tomorrow and the day after, until you can stand on your own." The widows nodded, each one feeling the weight of his words, but also the hope hidden within. For the first time in so long, they could imagine a future that was not only hunger and rejection. When they stepped outside, the sun was brighter, the streets busy again. People in the market noticed them leaving the human's workshop. Whispers began to rise. "Look, the widows found a fool to waste his time on them." Others laughed. "He will regret it soon. They will fail." The widows heard the cruel words. Their hearts stung, but they did not lower their heads this time. Instead, they walked taller because they knew something the crowd did not. Inside that small workshop, they had touched work. They had touched worth, and no laughter could erase it. As they walked home, one widow whispered to the others, "Do you think this will last?" Another answered softly, "If we do not give up, it will." The third held her cloth-stained hands close to her chest, whispering, "I want my children to see me as a worker, not a beggar." And so, as the stars appeared in the sky that night, the three widows sat with their hungry children, sharing the little food they had, but this time their hearts were not empty. They looked into their children's eyes and promised silently, "Tomorrow will be different. The galaxy had not yet noticed. But in that dusty workshop, a storm of change had already begun. A storm that would not stop until it swept across worlds. The widows kept returning to the workshop day after day, their hands rough with dust, their backs aching from lifting heavy scraps, but their eyes grew brighter with each sunrise every time they stepped inside. They were no longer beggars, they were workers. And even though their stomachs still growled at night, their hearts carried a fire of pride. The human gave them tasks without pity. He did not treat them as fragile or cursed. He told them to clean, to lift, to sort, to carry. And when they struggled, he told them, do it again when they made mistakes. He corrected them without anger, his voice steady, his eyes sharp. He treated them as if they were capable, and strangely, they were. But outside the workshop, the whispers began. At first just in the market, then spreading to the alleys, the homes, and finally the whole town. People could not stop talking, have you heard? The human gave jobs to the widows, one merchant sneered, shaking his head. Foolish man wasting his time. They will ruin his workshop, another scoffed. It is a trick, maybe he wants slaves. No one would give them real work. Others laughed. What kind of man hires widows? They are cursed, everyone knows that. Still, the whispers did not die, they grew louder, spreading like smoke through every corner of the town. The widows heard the cruel words whenever they walked home. Children mocked them. Calling them dust wives, merchants refused to sell to them, sometimes even throwing rotten food near their feet. But instead of breaking, the widows held their heads a little higher, because when they walked into that workshop, they knew they were more than what the crowd called them. One afternoon, as the widows scrubbed the rust off a massive engine frame, the second widow whispered, "Do you hear them outside?" "They laugh at us again," the third widow, her hands bleeding from scrubbing, shook her head. "Let them laugh. They do not see what we see." The first widow smiled faintly. "Yes, they do not see that he trusts us, even when the galaxy does not." The human heard their whispers but did not comment. Instead, he placed new tools before them and said, "If their words cut you, work harder. Let your hands answer them, not your tongue." His voice was calm but heavy with meaning. Slowly their skills grew sharper. They learned which gears matched, which scraps could be saved, which were only junk. They moved faster, cleaner, with more confidence. The workshop that once looked like a graveyard of machines was now beginning to breathe again. But the more progress they made, the louder the town grew. Some came to the door of the workshop just to jeer. "Hey, human, your widows will steal from you," others shouted. "Why waste your bread on broken women?" The human ignored them, but the widows felt their hearts burn. Part of them wanted to cry, but another part wanted to fight back. Not with fists, but with proof. One evening, when the widows left the workshop, they noticed a small group of children following them. Giggling and pointing, one boy shouted, "Look, the cursed widows think they are workers now." The youngest widow's hands tightened, but before she could cry, the first widow turned and said softly, "One day, you will call us something else." Her voice was quiet but firm. The boy froze, and for a moment the laughter stopped. The next morning, the widows returned earlier than usual, and to their surprise, the human was already working on a large broken machine, his sleeves rolled up, his hands black with grease. He looked up and said simply, "You are late." The widows lowered their heads, but he continued, "If you wish to silence the whispers, then you must learn faster, do more, become more. Are you ready?" Their hearts pounded, and together they answered, "Yes." That day, he gave them their first real test. He showed them how to strip a machine down piece by piece, and then clean and organize it for repair. It was hard. Their arms shook, their backs screamed with pain, but step by step they managed, their hands no longer weak but steady. By sunset, the parts lay neatly sorted. The widows stared at their work, disbelief filling their eyes. They had done something they never thought possible. The human nodded once, a rare hint of approval. "Now, you are no longer just workers, you are learning builders." The widows' chests filled with pride, and when they walked out into the streets that night, even though the whispers still followed them, they no longer felt like broken women. They felt like something greater, something rising but far away. Beyond their small town, rumors were already traveling. Merchants passing through carried the story. A human gave jobs to alien widows. Some laughed, others frowned, some were curious. And soon the tale was no longer just a whisper in one place. It had started to cross cities, then colonies. Like a spark carried on the wind, the widows did not know it yet. But the world was watching, and soon the galaxy itself would turn its eyes toward them. The widows had now been working in the humans' workshop for many days. Their hands no longer soft with weakness but rough with calluses, their backs straighter, their eyes sharper. Each morning they came with quiet determination. Each evening they left with a sense of worth they had never known before. But one morning as the sun rose, the human stood waiting at the door with a serious look on his face. "There is a big order," he said, his voice firm. "If we complete it, the workshop will grow. If we fail, the people will laugh louder than ever." The widows exchanged nervous glances, their hearts racing. They had only just begun to learn, and now he was asking them to stand beside him in something that could either save or ruin everything. The human opened the workshop and pointed to a massive machine, far larger than anything they had touched before. Its gears tangled, its frame cracked, wires spilling like veins. "This must be fixed and delivered in 3 days," he said. "If we succeed, you will prove more than anyone ever believed. If we fail, we lose everything." The widows' throats went dry. Fear wrapped around their hearts, one whispered. "We are not ready," another said. "We cannot do this." But the human shook his head. "You can because you must. Do not forget why you are here." The work began at once. The human gave instructions while the widows scrambled to keep up. They lifted heavy frames, sorted dozens of parts, cleaned every corner of the machine. Their bodies screamed with exhaustion, but they kept pushing, their children's hungry faces flashing in their minds. By the second day, their progress was clear. The machine's shape began to return, its broken pieces slowly fitting together like a puzzle. But late in the evening, disaster struck. As the human tested the wiring, sparks flew, smoke filled the room, and part of the machine collapsed again with a loud crash. The widows froze, their hearts sinking. "It is ruined," one whispered. "We cannot finish now." Their hope threatened to shatter. Outside, voices gathered near the door. Townsfolk who had come to mock. "See, they failed." Just as we said, the human wiped the sweat from his brow, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with stubborn fire. He turned to the widows and said, "Listen to me, failure only wins if you stop. Do not let this moment destroy you. Stand up and fight." The widows stared at him, his words heavy, and slowly they found strength inside themselves. One stepped forward. "Tell us what to do." The others nodded. "We will not stop now." Together they returned to work. This time with sharper focus, they divided tasks. One cleaned the wiring again, carefully removing every damaged strand. Another held the frame steady, refusing to let her arms drop even though they shook. The third sorted through the pile of gears, finding replacements with precision. Hours passed, their hands blistered, their bodies near breaking. But they moved like a team, supporting one another, their fear replaced by determination. The human guided them but did not do everything. He let them prove themselves, and they did. By the third day, the machine stood tall again, its frame steady, its gears aligned, its heart beating with power when it roared to life. The sound shook the workshop walls. The widows stepped back, their eyes wide with disbelief, tears running down their faces. They had done it outside. The townsfolk who had gathered to laugh went silent. Their sneers turned to shock. The human opened the doors wide so all could see. "Look at them," he said loudly, his voice echoing. "These are the women you called cursed, the women you mocked. And yet they fixed what none of you dared to touch." The crowd gasped. Some looked away in shame. Others stared with new respect. Whispers began to spread. But this time they were different, no longer mocking, now uncertain, curious, even impressed. The widows stood together, trembling. Not from fear, but from pride, for the first time in so long. They were not invisible, not broken, not cursed. They were workers, creators, builders. They had saved the workshop, and in doing so, they had saved themselves. That night, as they walked home, their children ran to greet them. The widows held them close, whispering, "We did it. We are not beggars anymore." Their children's eyes shone with wonder, seeing their mothers in a new light. But the victory did not only belong to the widows. The story of what they had done began to spread faster than before, carried by merchants, carried by travelers. The tale of 3 widows and a human who trusted them reached beyond the town, beyond the city, like fire carried by the wind. Yet not everyone celebrated. In the shadows, powerful voices stirred. Voices that feared change, voices that whispered, "This cannot be allowed. If widows can work, then others will rise too." And though the widows did not know it yet, their fight was only beginning. The turning point had come, and the galaxy had started to listen. The victory of the widows spread like wildfire. Their names whispered in markets, on streets, and even in nearby towns. People who once mocked them now spoke in hushed tones, some with respect, some with envy, and some with anger. The machine they had repaired stood as proof of what they could do, and it was impossible to ignore. But while many were silent, not everyone was pleased. The local officials, men who held power and pride, saw the change as a threat. These officials were used to controlling who worked, who starved, and who survived. They had built their power on keeping the weak weak, widows especially, who were seen as worthless. Suddenly, those same widows were earning respect, and it made the officials restless. On the fourth morning after the great repair, the widows arrived at the workshop early, their faces glowing with hope. They carried water and bread for the first time in weeks, small gifts bought with their new wages. Their children had eaten well last night, and their laughter still echoed in their hearts. But as they reached the workshop, they froze. Standing outside were 3 armored officials, their cloaks heavy, their faces stern. Behind them stood guards with sharp weapons. The market around them had gone quiet. Everyone watching, waiting. The human stepped out of the workshop, his expression calm but his eyes sharp as steel. The lead official stepped forward and shouted, "Human, you have broken the order of this town. You dare to employ widows. You dare to give them dignity." His voice dripped with contempt. "This cannot be allowed." The widows' hearts sank. Fear returned like a heavy chain. They lowered their heads. Whispers ran through the crowd. "It is over. The officials will punish them. The widows will lose everything." The official pointed at the widows. "They are cursed. They bring shame. They should not touch machines. They should not earn wages. You insult our laws by raising them." His words rang like thunder. Some in the crowd nodded. Others looked uncertain. The human did not flinch. He crossed his arms and said firmly, "What law have I broken? I gave them work, honest work. They earned bread by their own hands. If that insults your pride, then perhaps your pride is weaker than you think." The crowd gasped. Whispers filled the air. Never had anyone spoken to an official like that. The widows looked at the human in shock, their hearts trembling. One whispered, "He is risking everything for us." The lead official's face turned red with anger. "You mock authority? You stand against the laws that keep this town in order? If you continue, we will shut down your workshop, seize your machines, and cast these widows back to the dirt where they belong." The widows felt their knees weaken. Tears filled their eyes. The fear of losing everything again nearly crushed them. But the human stepped forward, his voice rising, his words strong. "No, they do not belong in the dirt. They belong here as workers, as builders. As people with worth, you call them cursed. I call them capable, you call them a burden. I call them hope." His words cut through the air like a blade. The crowd fell silent. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably. For a moment the world seemed to pause. The widows raised their heads slowly, their tears still falling, but now mixed with something stronger, pride. They had never heard anyone defend them like this. Not their neighbors, not their families, no one. The human's words lit a fire in their hearts. The official tried again, his voice shaking with fury. "You will regret this, human. You cannot change what has always been. Widows are nothing, and nothing is what they will remain." The human's reply was calm but powerful. "Then open your eyes, because they have already changed, and nothing you do can stop it." Gasps spread through the crowd. The widows stood taller, their backs straight, their hands trembling not with fear but with courage. The officials, red with humiliation, finally turned away, their cloaks snapping in the air, but their voices carried a threat. "This is not the end, human. The council will hear of this, and you will be punished." The guards followed them. The crowd slowly dispersed, buzzing with whispers, some fearful, some inspired, everyone knowing they had just witnessed something that would not be forgotten. Inside the workshop, the widows stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the human. One finally spoke in a broken voice. "Why? Why risk yourself for us? You could lose everything." The human looked at them with steady eyes. "Because no one should decide your worth but you. Because dignity is not a gift from the powerful. It is earned with your hands. And you have already earned it." The widows broke into tears. Not of despair, but of something they had never felt so strongly. Belonging. One whispered, "You gave us back our lives," another said. "Even if the council comes, we will not beg again." That night, the widows walked home differently, no longer with heads bowed, but with pride shining in their eyes. The whole town had seen them stand tall beside the human, and though danger was rising, so too was hope. What they did not know yet was that the officials' threats would not end here. The fight had only begun, and soon the galaxy itself would hear their story. The council did not stay silent for long. Within days, word spread that officials had reported the humans' defiance. The widows felt the weight of fear return. Whispers in the market grew louder. The council will crush him. They will throw the widows out again. Yet at the same time, something else stirred among the people. Curiosity, even admiration. Merchants who once spat at the widows now found themselves watching with different eyes. They had seen the machine repaired. They had heard the humans' words, and deep inside, many wondered if the widows were truly cursed, or if they had been lied to all along. But the story did not stop in the town. Travelers carried it further from one settlement to another. Soon it reached nearby colonies, then starships, then entire worlds. 3 alien widows. Given work by a human, they said, and they succeeded. The tale grew larger with every telling, until it echoed across the galaxy like a storm. Meanwhile, in the workshop, the widows worked harder than ever. Each day their skills grew sharper. Each day they learned more. Their hands no longer trembled. Their backs no longer bent with shame. They stood tall, proud. Their children no longer cried of hunger every night. Their laughter filled the small homes where once silence lived. One evening, as the widows scrubbed grease from their arms, the human entered quietly, his face tired but calm. He looked at them for a long moment before saying, "You should know the council will come again. They will try to break us." The widows exchanged nervous glances, their hearts beating fast, but then the first widow lifted her chin and said, "Let them come, we will not hide anymore." The second nodded. "We are not beggars, we are workers," and the third whispered firmly, "We will stand with you." The human's lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. Good, because the galaxy is already watching. And once the truth spreads, no council can silence it. And he was right. For days later, something incredible happened. News screens across planets lit up with images. Travelers had recorded the human's defiance in the market. His words spoken with fire. They are not beggars, they are workers. They are hope. Those words now played across distant colonies, shared in streets, in stations, even in the halls of power. The widows never imagined their faces would be seen beyond their own broken town. But now millions were watching. Widows across the stars who had once hidden in shame lifted their heads. Orphans whispered to their mothers, "Maybe we can work too." Voices of the forgotten echoed with new strength. The council tried to silence the story, but it was too late. The more they tried, the louder it grew. Soon people across the galaxy were asking the same question. If one human could give dignity to widows, why can't we? Back in the town, the officials returned once more, their faces pale with frustration. They shouted threats. "You have made a spectacle of this. You have insulted authority. You will pay for this outrage." But when they looked around, they realized the crowd was no longer silent. People who once mocked now stood firm, whispering support. "Leave them be. They have done nothing wrong." The human stepped forward, his voice steady. "Your threats mean nothing. Because your power is already broken, the galaxy knows the truth." He pointed to the widows who stood proudly behind him, grease still on their hands. "They have proven themselves. No law, no curse. No fear can erase that," the officials faltered. Their voices lost under the weight of the crowd's silence. One by one they turned and walked away, defeated not by violence but by truth. The widows felt tears roll down their faces. But this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of victory. The first widow whispered, "It is over." The second shook her head. "No, it is only the beginning." And the third, with trembling voice, said, "The galaxy will never see us the same again." That night, in the quiet of the workshop, the widows sat with the human, their children sleeping nearby. They looked at him with gratitude deeper than words. One finally said softly, "You gave us more than work. You gave us life." Another whispered, "You made the galaxy listen." The human looked at them, his voice low but full of weight. "I did not give you life. You took it back with your own hands, remember that? Because tomorrow there will be others like you, and they will look to you for strength." The widows nodded. Their hearts full, they understood. Their struggle was no longer just for themselves. It was for every forgotten voice across the stars. And so the story of 3 alien widows and 1 human spread across the galaxy, not as a tale of charity, but as a tale of courage, dignity, and change. Leaders argued, councils feared, but the people remembered. The widows had begged once, "Please, give us work." And 1 human's answer had shocked the galaxy forever.